A woman's journey to independence after family betrayal. Reddit family drama story. Welcome to another emotional Reddit family drama story on our channel. In today's video, we dive into a heart-wrenching tale of family rejection, betrayal, and the struggle to find strength within when those you love the most turn their back on you. What happens when you reach out for help and receive nothing but cold indifference? Watch till the end to see how one woman discovers the true meaning of family. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Silent Wars for more powerful and emotional stories that will make you reflect on your own family dynamics. My name is Rachel, and I'm 32 years old. I live in Denver, Colorado, with my husband, Matt, and our 8-year-old daughter, Lily, who is truly the light of my life. I run a small interior design firm where I specialize in creating beautiful, functional spaces, everything from apartments and townhouses to small cafes that evoke warmth and a sense of connection. It's not a life of luxury, but it's enough. We manage to pay the bills, support our family, and provide for Lily's future. Still, there's always been something missing, a deep sense of belonging, of unconditional love that I didn't fully recognize until much later in life. Growing up, I was always the one who seemed to be overlooked. My parents, Grace and John, came from humble beginnings, but they worked hard to build a life that, on the surface, appeared to be a perfect reflection of success. My dad ran a small but respected furniture store in our town, and my mom, ever the perfectionist, always wore expensive clothes and spoke in a way that made her seem more polished than anyone I knew. To everyone else, they seemed to have it all: wealth, status, and a family that was thriving. But behind closed doors, I learned that appearances mattered more than anything else. My parents were not as happy as they appeared to be, and love, true, unconditional love, was reserved for only one thing: the image they wanted to project. From a young age, I quickly realized that love in my family wasn't about support or understanding. It was about admiration, and that admiration could only be given to those who met certain standards that were often unattainable. I was the quiet, hard-working child who often found solace in books, sketching designs, or simply keeping to myself. My younger brother, Chris, on the other hand, was the golden child. He was charming, outgoing, and, at least in their eyes, capable of impressing anyone with his effortless charisma. I learned early on that no matter how hard I tried, whether I scored a perfect grade on a test, worked hard at my part-time job, or applied for college, I would never receive the same level of attention or praise as Chris did. For him, love and admiration came naturally. For me, it felt like something I had to earn, and no matter how much I worked, it was never enough. In high school, I watched as Chris would receive extravagant birthday presents, celebratory dinners, and attention from everyone around him, even for the smallest of accomplishments. Meanwhile, when I would quietly excel in school or show my parents a new design I was proud of, the response was always subdued. "That's nice, Rachel," my mom would say, but there was never a genuine smile or an encouraging word. It wasn't that I didn't care about Chris or his success, but I could see clearly that no matter what I did, I would never be the one who mattered. In their eyes, I wasn't special. I was just the dependable, practical child, always in the background, and that was enough. The reality of being overlooked didn't hit me fully until I went to college. While I was navigating the world on my own, pouring my heart into my studies, and beginning to make my mark in the world, my parents continued to pour all their attention into Chris, as if his achievements were the only ones that counted. When I got into architecture school in Chicago, I was met with a curt acknowledgement from my mom, and that was it. There was no celebration, no pride in my accomplishments. Just the quiet acceptance that I had done what was expected of me. Meanwhile, when Chris made it to a local community college, My parents threw him a farewell party with live music and all the fanfare you would expect for a major life event. I slowly came to terms with this dynamic, and by the time I met Matt and we started our own family, I had already learned to fend for myself. I knew that I could never rely on my parents for emotional support or validation, but I still held out hope that one day they would see me for who I truly was, someone who worked hard, achieved things on her own, and built a life that wasn't perfect, but was hers. I wanted nothing more than to be seen, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. But as time passed, I came to realize that this would never happen. I was always going to be the background figure in their lives, and the love they offered was always going to be conditional, based on the image they wanted to maintain rather than the reality of our family. This realization stung, but it also gave me the strength to build my own family, my own life, and my own sense of belonging. And though it hurt to know that I had never been enough for my parents, I knew that I didn't need their approval to succeed or to be loved. I have a younger brother, Chris, who is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, I always thought we would share the same love and attention from our parents. But from the moment Chris was born, it became painfully clear that the dynamics in our family were not what I had expected. The idea of fairness and equal treatment that I held onto so dearly was shattered, and I began to understand something I hadn't fully grasped before. In our family, love wasn't always about effort. It was about who had the most performative value. I remember the day I aced my math exam in 8th grade. It was a huge achievement for me. I had worked hard, studied late into the night, and felt a deep sense of pride as I handed over the test to my teacher. When I got the results back 100%, I couldn't wait to show my parents. I imagined the praise, the recognition, the pride in their eyes. But when I told them, my mom barely looked up from her book and simply said, "Good. You did what you were supposed to." There was no celebration, no enthusiasm, just a flat acknowledgement that I had completed the task expected of me. It stung, but I told myself it was no big deal. After all, it was just a math test, right? But what happened a few days later made me question everything. Chris had barely passed his history class with a B+, a grade that would have been seen as an underachievement in any other family. But in ours, it became a monumental accomplishment. I stood in the kitchen, watching my parents throw a celebration for him. They clapped, smiled, and even baked a cake. They praised him like he had just won a Nobel Prize. I could hear their laughter, see their pride as they presented him with gifts and special treats, all for a B+ in history. I didn't know how to process it. I stood there, feeling like a stranger in my own family, trying to make sense of the situation. It was so glaringly unfair. My efforts, my hard work, my academic success, none of it mattered in that moment. It wasn't enough to be smart, to excel. What mattered was how you performed for the audience. Chris didn't need to try. He was the charming, outgoing one who effortlessly captured the attention of everyone around him. He had performative value, while I had always been the quieter, more reserved one who just did what was expected without fanfare. I wasn't angry at Chris. I knew he didn't ask for any of this. In fact, I felt sorry for him. He was just as much a victim of our family's priorities as I was. It wasn't his fault that he seemed to get all the attention without even trying. I started to realize that this wasn't just a one-time occurrence. It was part of a bigger pattern. Every time I worked hard to achieve something, it was brushed aside or downplayed. But when Chris made the slightest effort, it was treated like a major victory. This realization hit me harder than I expected. I began to understand that love in our family wasn't something that was earned through effort. It was something that was given based on who could perform, who could impress the crowd, who could make the best show of things. I wasn't the one who had the charm, the charisma, the easy smile. I was the one who worked behind the scenes, quietly doing my best without expecting anything in return. But in our family, that wasn't enough. Over time, I learned to accept that I was never going to be the one who received the attention or praise I craved. It wasn't personal, it was just how things were. But the more I reflected on this, the more I realized that I didn't want to be the person who kept fighting for validation from people who didn't see my worth. I wanted to be someone who could stand on her own, who could succeed not for others, but for myself. I knew I was capable of great things, but I also knew that I had to stop waiting for approval from a family that had already decided who deserved their love. And that was the moment when I stopped trying to prove myself. I stopped seeking approval from anyone but myself. As I grew older, I realized that the pattern I had been subjected to all my life wasn't going to change. My parents, Grace and John, would never celebrate my accomplishments. They would never cheer me on in the way I longed for. Instead, they continued to give all their attention to Chris, my younger brother, who could do no wrong in their eyes. With time, I learned a difficult lesson. I could no longer expect anything from them. The approval I so desperately wanted would never come. So, I had two choices: keep fighting for validation that would never arrive, or learn to stand on my own, no matter how hard it might be. It wasn't an easy shift. For years, I kept hoping that somehow things would change, that one day they would see my efforts, appreciate my sacrifices, and finally, give me the recognition I deserved. But that day never came. When I got into college on my own, after years of hard work and sacrifice, I was greeted with a simple, "That's nice." No congratulations, no excitement, just indifference. It stung, more than I would like to admit. But in that moment, I knew for sure. I wasn't going to keep seeking approval from people who didn't even know how to give it. I had been fighting a battle that wasn't mine to win. Then came the day Chris made it into a local community college. The reaction was everything I had hoped for in my own achievements. He was celebrated, given a grand farewell party, and showered with attention. My parents were ecstatic, bragging to friends and family about how proud they were of him. They threw him a party with all the bells and whistles, catering, a live band, balloons, and even a social media post declaring how proud they were. They made him feel like he had just won a major life achievement, even though it was just a community college, a modest step at best. As I watched this unfold, something inside me snapped. For so long, I had tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, if I did enough, they would see me. But this grand celebration of Chris's minor accomplishment made me realize the cold truth. They would never see me. They would never see the countless hours I spent studying, the sacrifices I made, or the hard work I poured into my life and career. It wasn't about what I had achieved. It was about what they could show off to the world. Chris was the one who could charm everyone, while I was the one who quietly did the work. In their eyes, he was the one who mattered. That moment, I decided to let go. I quietly stopped looking for their approval. The pain of constantly being overlooked began to fade, replaced with a sense of liberation. I realized that I didn't need their validation to be proud of myself. I could be proud of what I had built on my own, without needing them to recognize it. Instead of pouring my energy into trying to win their affection, I channeled all of it into something I truly cared about: building my design firm. It became my sanctuary, my place where I could create, grow, and thrive without anyone else's opinion dictating my worth. By the time I met Matt, I was already learning how to stand on my own. He was different from everyone I had known before. He didn't care about appearances, didn't need to impress anyone, and most importantly, he saw me for who I really was. Matt was a grounding force in my life. Together, we built a life where we didn't rely on the validation of others, especially not my family. I found strength in being independent, in knowing that my value wasn't defined by my parents or anyone else. I had learned to find my worth in my own eyes, and that was something they could never take away from me. Matt and I built a family that was based on love, trust, and mutual support. It was everything I had wanted but had never gotten from my parents. We had our daughter, Lily, who became the center of my world. And though we weren't wealthy, we had enough to live comfortably. And most importantly, we had each other. In our small but peaceful world, I didn't need anyone else to tell me I was enough. I already knew I was. In the end, I learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from being surrounded by others, but from standing alone. Choosing to let go of toxic relationships and unrealistic expectations was the most empowering thing I've ever done. I stopped searching for approval from a family that would never see me for who I was, and in doing so, I found the strength to become who I was always meant to be. And with that, I was finally free. Matt and I had built a life together that I could finally be proud of. We had weathered financial struggles, faced countless challenges, and yet we were happy. I found comfort in knowing that, despite the hardship, we had something more important than material wealth: love. The love we shared as a family was unconditional, the kind of love that supported us through the tough times and celebrated the good. The arrival of our daughter Lily only deepened that bond. She was the light of our lives, and I poured everything I had into making sure she knew she was loved and cherished. But while Matt and I worked tirelessly to create a nurturing environment for Lily, the shadows of my past crept back in, reminding me of the love I never received from my family. It wasn't a lack of love per se, it was the way love was measured and given in my family. From the very beginning, I realized that love in my family was always conditional, determined by how much you could perform for others. My parents, Grace and John, never truly celebrated my accomplishments the way they did Chris's, my younger brother. I had come to accept that my efforts would never earn me the kind of recognition or admiration I longed for. When Lily was born, I watched my parents treat her like she was fragile, like she was something precious that had to be handled with utmost care. I remember them hovering over her crib, whispering sweet words to her, their voices soft and protective. And while I appreciated their love for my daughter, I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast to the way they treated me when I was young. I had never received that same attention, that same care. As a child, I was always expected to fend for myself. My achievements were brushed aside, overshadowed by the need to cater to the image of success that my parents worked so hard to maintain. But with Lily, everything was different. She was their new focal point, their new project, and it hurt me in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. I worked hard every day, pouring my heart and soul into my design business, hoping that one day my success would finally earn me the respect and recognition I never got growing up. Yet, even as I built a name for myself and supported my family, it seemed as though my parents couldn't find it in themselves to acknowledge my achievements. There were no congratulations, no words of encouragement, just silence. They were too busy focusing on their image, on appearances, to ever take a moment to notice the person I had become. Despite the emotional toll, I kept going. I continued to work, to create, to build, believing that one day my efforts would speak for themselves. I believed that eventually my success would be undeniable, and it would force them to see me in a way they never had before. But that belief came with a weight. I realized that I wasn't just working for financial stability, I was working for something deeper. I was working for recognition, for acknowledgement that I had value, that I was worthy of love and respect. But as the years went by, I came to understand something painful but essential. I wasn't going to get that recognition from my parents. They didn't see me for who I was. They didn't see the sacrifices I had made, the way I had poured everything I had into my family, my work, and my daughter. They didn't see me as the woman who had fought against all odds to create a life that was meaningful and fulfilling. Instead, they saw me as someone who was too independent, too focused on her own path to fit into their carefully curated image of what family should be. I realized that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I accomplished, I wasn't going to be able to change the way my parents saw me. The love I had longed for, love that was based on admiration and validation, would never come from them. And in that realization, I understood that I had to stop waiting for it. I had to stop chasing something that wasn't meant for me, something that wasn't given freely or without conditions. Instead, I chose to focus on the love I had in my life, the love Matt and I shared, the love we gave to Lily, and the love I had found in the family we had built. That love was real, and it was enough. It didn't need to be earned or measured. It simply existed. And that, in the end, was all I needed.
It was a day I'll never forget, and a moment that would change everything for me. It started like any other day until Lily's health began to decline rapidly. What seemed like a small cough at first quickly escalated, and soon she was unable to catch her breath, her face pale and her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. I watched helplessly as my bright, energetic daughter became weak and fragile before my eyes. The fear that gripped me in those moments was something I had never experienced before. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. All I could hear were the sounds of her labored breathing and the rising panic in my own chest. Matt and I rushed her to the hospital, where doctors immediately took action, running a battery of tests to determine what was wrong. Hours later, we were sitting in a cold white room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, waiting for answers. When the doctor finally walked in, he didn't sugarcoat the situation. He explained that Lily had an abnormal mass in her lung, pressing against her airway, and that it needed to be removed urgently. My heart dropped as he told us that the surgery would be necessary within the next 48 hours to prevent further complications. Then came the worst part, the cost. The surgery would be upwards of $98,000 an amount that we simply didn't have. In that moment, the realization hit me like a brick. I had been putting off getting full health insurance for our family, hoping to save money by delaying it. I always told myself that we would get around to it when our finances were more stable. But now, time was no longer on our side. I couldn't wait any longer. My daughter's life was at risk, and I had to do whatever it took to get the help she needed. I turned to my parents, hoping they would be there for us when we needed them most. I hesitated for a moment before picking up the phone and dialing their number. My heart was pounding as I waited for the call to connect. When my mother's voice finally came through, I tried to steady my breath. I could hear the usual coolness in her tone, but this time I was desperate. "Mom, it's Lily. She's in the hospital and she needs emergency surgery. The doctors said we need $98,000 for the operation. We don't have the money and we can't get the loan. Please, I'm asking for your help. Can you just help with a part of it?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and my heart sank as I waited for her response. When she finally spoke, her words were as cold as they were heart-wrenching. "Well, this is really bad timing, you know. We have a celebration planned next week for your father and me, our 40th wedding anniversary. We've already made all the arrangements, and so many guests have been invited. It would be incredibly inconvenient to cancel now, Emily. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can help." I felt a sharp pang of disbelief and sorrow. This wasn't the response I was expecting, not from the people who had been a part of my life for so long, not from the family I had always thought would come through when it mattered. But their indifference hit me like a cold slap to the face. I was calling for help to save my daughter's life, and they were more concerned about an anniversary party than the well-being of their own granddaughter. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I couldn't hold them back anymore. I had always tried to be strong, always tried to keep going despite their neglect. But this was different. This was my daughter, and she needed me. She needed my family to care, to help in any way they could. But in that moment, I realized that my parents, my family, were not the ones I could turn to in times of true need. I hung up the phone without saying another word. The weight of their rejection felt unbearable, and it left a wound in my heart that I knew would take time to heal. But there was no time for self-pity. My daughter needed me, and I would not let her suffer because of my family's inability to understand what truly mattered. I returned to Ava's hospital room with a heavy heart. Matt was waiting for me there, and when I told him everything, he simply nodded and squeezed my hand. "We'll find a way," he said quietly, and in that moment, I knew that he and I were in this together. We didn't need anyone else. We would figure it out, for Ava. I took a deep breath and wiped away the tears that had begun to fall. The fight for my daughter's life wasn't over yet. It was a moment I can never forget, the moment that shattered everything I had believed about my family. My daughter Ava was lying in a hospital bed, her life hanging in the balance. The doctors had told us that the surgery she needed to survive was urgent, and the cost was astronomical, $98,000. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to figure out how to come up with the money, knowing we were nowhere near prepared for this financial burden. For years, I had worked hard to support my family. I had built my business from the ground up, putting in long hours and pouring my heart into every project I took on. Matt and I had struggled at times, but we had managed to create a life for ourselves and for Ava. But now, faced with the immediate need for such a large sum, I felt helpless. We didn't have insurance, and we had already exhausted every option we could think of. In my desperation, I turned to my parents. I swallowed my pride, knowing that I had not received much support from them in the past. But in that moment, I believed they would come through for their granddaughter. After all, family was supposed to be there for each other, right? I called my mom, my voice trembling as I explained Ava's condition and the urgency of the situation. "Mom, Ava needs surgery. The doctor said we have to move fast. We need $98,000 to cover the surgery and post-op care. We don't have that kind of money, and I don't know where else to turn. Please, I'm begging you. Can you help?" The silence on the other end of the line felt like an eternity. I could hear the faint hum of the background noise, the muffled clinking of dishes, or maybe the sound of my mom's high heels on the floor. She was quiet for so long that I began to wonder if she had even heard me. But then her voice broke through the silence, cold, distant, and indifferent. "This is really bad timing, Rachel," she said, her tone almost casual. "Your father and I are celebrating our 40th anniversary soon. We have a big event planned, and everything's been arranged. I'm sorry, but we can't help right now. It's just not the right time." My heart dropped. I felt a sudden rush of heat in my chest, my breath coming faster as the weight of her words sank in. How could she say that? How could she prioritize an anniversary celebration over her granddaughter's life? I tried to speak, to beg her one more time, but the words caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to tell her how much I needed her, how desperate I was, but I couldn't. Instead, I hung up. The phone slipped from my hand, and for a moment, I just stood there, staring at the floor, unable to even comprehend what had just happened. The pain in my chest was unbearable, and I couldn't stop the tears from streaming down my face. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their love, trying to prove my worth. For years, I had done everything I could to meet their expectations, but it was never enough. I worked hard, I achieved great things, but nothing was ever good enough to earn their approval. I had learned to live with their indifference, to suppress my own needs and desires for the sake of maintaining the image of a perfect family. But in that moment, I realized that all the love I had given, all the sacrifices I had made, meant nothing to them. To them, appearances were everything, and their reputation meant more than their own blood. I stood there, motionless, as the reality of it all set in. They had turned their backs on me, on Ava, in our time of need. I felt completely alone, but I couldn't let that stop me. I couldn't give up. I had promised Ava that I would always protect her, and I wasn't about to let her down now. With the phone still in my hand, I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to let my family's indifference define me. I had learned the hard way that sometimes you can't rely on the people who are supposed to love you. Sometimes You have to be the one to stand up for yourself, for your family. I wasn't asking for their help anymore. I would find a way to save Ava, no matter what it took. I wiped my tears away and picked up the phone again. This time I was calling Matt. He didn't know what had just happened, but I knew that with him by my side, we could find a solution. We had to, for Ava. The hardest moment of my life came when I found myself standing outside my parents' mansion, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. My daughter, Lily, was fighting for her life in the hospital, and I was at the end of my rope. I had already exhausted every option, from calling banks to pleading with friends, but the money for Lily's emergency surgery was still out of reach. With each passing hour, her condition worsened, and the sense of helplessness threatened to swallow me whole. I didn't want to go back to my parents, especially not now. The years of feeling invisible, overlooked, and undervalued had left deep scars. But in my desperation, I found myself making the one call I had never imagined I would make. I called my mother. I begged her for help, explained the situation, and told her that her granddaughter's life was at stake. But when she turned me down, I knew I had no other choice. I had to go to them.
As I drove up to their mansion, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread in my stomach. I had spent my whole life trying to fit into their mold, trying to earn their approval, but every effort had been in vain. They never truly saw me, not for who I was, not for what I had achieved. But Lily was different. She was their granddaughter, and surely they would help her. I couldn't bring myself to believe that they would turn their backs on her too. When I walked into the house, the first thing I noticed was the lavish decor. The house was bursting with gold ribbons, sparkling lights, and extravagant floral arrangements. The air was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. My brother Chris was standing in the middle of it all, grinning ear to ear as he showed off his brand new engagement ring. The event was for him his engagement party. I felt like I had stepped into a different world, one where everything was pristine and perfect, a world where I no longer belonged. I stood in the grand foyer holding Lily's medical records in my hands, trying to summon the strength to speak. It felt surreal, like I was trapped in a bad dream. Here I was, at the lowest point of my life, and all they seemed to care about was their picture-perfect world. I approached my mother, desperate, with my voice trembling. "Mom, please, I need help. Lily needs emergency surgery. We don't have the money. Please, I'm begging you. She's your granddaughter." My mother barely looked at me as she adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. "Rachel, not now. We're celebrating Chris's engagement. This is important." She didn't even blink. The words felt like a slap to my face, and I could hear the faint murmur of laughter in the background. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what was happening. Chris, standing beside me, let out a laugh that made my blood run cold. "What's the big deal?" he said, looking me up and down. "We're all focused on our futures, Rachel. You know how it is." His dismissive tone stung like a needle, but it wasn't the sting that hurt the most. It was the realization that, in this family, appearances were everything. Nothing else mattered. I looked around at the perfectly curated guests, the elegance, the pristine facade that they worked so hard to maintain. I had once been a part of it, once believed that if I just tried harder, if I just worked harder, I would earn a place in their world. But now, standing in this room, I realized that it was all a lie. They didn't care. Not about me, not about Lily. I couldn't take it anymore. I looked at my mother, my father, and Chris, my voice shaking as I spoke. If family doesn't help each other in tough times, then is it even a family? The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of discomfort in my mother's eyes. But it was gone just as quickly as it came. I didn't wait for a response. I couldn't. I turned around and walked out, feeling like I was suffocating in the air that used to feel so familiar. I had given so much of myself to this family, only to be met with indifference and coldness when I needed them most. The door slammed behind me as I left that mansion, left the family that had never really seen me. As I sat in the car, tears filled my eyes. Not because of the pain, but because I had finally realized the truth. This family wasn't mine anymore. It hadn't been for years. And I was done pretending. I wasn't going to beg for their love, for their help, for anything anymore. I had to stand on my own. For Lily. For me. For our future. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But in that moment, I knew it was the only choice I had left. That night, after hearing my parents' cold refusal to help, something inside me finally broke. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, their approval, always hoping that one day they would see me for who I truly was, not just the child they dismissed. But in that moment, the last shred of hope I had for ever being seen by them faded away. I left that mansion knowing one thing: I would never beg them again. I would never stand in front of them, asking for help that they were so unwilling to offer. From that point on, I was on my own, and I would fight for my family, Matt and Lily, without them. I got into the car, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had just transpired. The disbelief, the pain, the realization that the people who should have had my back the most were the ones who abandoned me when I needed them the most. But even in the face of that crushing blow, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. I wasn't going to let their rejection define me anymore. I wasn't going to let it destroy my family. I wasn't going to let Lily down. The next day, Matt and I took action. We had to. There was no other option. The surgery Lily desperately needed was still looming over us, and we had to find a way to make it happen. I looked around our small apartment, the things we had worked so hard to build together, and knew that we were going to have to sacrifice them all. We sold everything we could. Matt's beloved truck, the one he had driven us on countless road trips, the one we'd taken to our honeymoon. I knew it broke his heart, but he didn't hesitate. We sold our furniture, our electronics, anything of value. Every little thing that we could part with, we did. It wasn't enough, not by a long shot, but it was a start. As I listed the items online, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. I had always been the one to rely on others, to ask for help, to hope that someone, anyone, would come through for me. But now, for the first time in my life, I was doing it all on my own. I was the one taking control of my family's future. And though the weight of the situation still hung heavily over me, there was a fire inside me that I hadn't felt before. Slowly, the support of friends and kind-hearted strangers began to pour in. People I hadn't spoken to in years, people I'd helped in the past, came forward with donations. Some sent money, some offered to help in any way they could. It was humbling. It reminded me that, even when my own family had turned their backs on me, there were still good people in the world. People who understood what it meant to help each other. People who saw me for who I really was, not for the mistakes my parents had made. Despite the help, we were still far from the amount we needed. But something had shifted in me. The fear that once gripped me, the worry that had paralyzed me, was slowly fading away. I was no longer afraid. I had to be strong, for Lily, for Matt. I knew I would do whatever it took to get her the surgery she needed. I would go through hell and back if that's what it took. I didn't need my parents. I didn't need their money. I didn't need their approval. I had everything I needed in the people who truly cared about me. I realized that I had been seeking validation from the wrong people my whole life. My worth wasn't defined by them or anyone else. It was defined by my actions, my love for my family, and my unwavering determination to fight for them. By the end of that week, we had raised enough money. It wasn't easy, but we made it happen. Lily had her surgery, and though the road to recovery was long, she made it through. And as I sat by her hospital bed, holding her hand, Watching her breathe steadily for the first time in what felt like forever, I knew that everything had changed. I had learned the most important lesson of my life. Sometimes you have to fight for your family, even if it means walking away from those who should have been there for you. And I would never again allow anyone, not even my parents, to define my worth. We were enough, just as we were. Just when I had reached the breaking point, something miraculous happened. In the midst of our desperation, when we had nearly sold everything of value, when we were still struggling to make up the difference for Lily's surgery, Matt's parents stepped forward. It was an act of kindness I never expected from them, an act that completely changed the course of our lives. Matt's parents, Carol and Henry, had always been modest people. They lived in a small, cozy home in the southern suburbs of Denver, a house they had cherished for nearly 30 years. It wasn't large, but it was theirs. It was filled with memories, old photos, and laughter from countless family dinners. They weren't wealthy, not even close, but they were always there for us in the quiet, reliable ways that mattered. I had always known they were kind, but this act of generosity was something entirely different. It was an act of love in its purest form. The morning they came to us, Matt and I were in the middle of one of the most stressful days of our lives. We had just finished a final round of calls to everyone we could think of: old friends, former colleagues, even acquaintances from past business ventures, and despite all the offers of help, we were still far from the goal we needed. The pressure was suffocating. As I sat at my kitchen table running through figures in my head, Matt's parents knocked at the door. I didn't expect much more than comforting words, a little more encouragement. But when they walked in, there was a quiet determination in their eyes. Carol, usually soft-spoken and gentle, sat across from me with a serious look on her face. Henry, her husband, placed a folder on the table. I felt my heart race. "We've been talking," Carol began, her voice steady. "And we've decided that we want to help." I froze. Help? But we had nothing left to give. The weight of the situation had drained us both: Matt, who was doing his best to keep it together, and me, who was struggling to stay hopeful for Lily. Yet, here they were, with an offer I never thought I'd hear. "We've decided to sell our house," Henry said quietly, his voice deep and unwavering. "The proceeds will cover the rest of what you need for Lily's surgery. You don't need to worry about paying us back." I stared at them, my heart in my throat. The idea of them selling their home, a home filled with years of memories, was beyond comprehension. They had worked hard their entire lives to keep that house, to hold on to it as a symbol of their stability. And now they were willing to sacrifice it all for us, for Lily. It was the last thing I expected from the very people I had always assumed would never have the resources to help. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at them, unable to say anything for a moment. I wanted to argue, to refuse, but I knew deep down that this was an offer born out of a love that was unshakable, unselfish. This was the love that I had always longed for, without conditions, without judgments. They didn't have to do this. They had their own challenges to face. But they chose to stand by us anyway. "Are you sure?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're giving up everything." Carol nodded, her eyes softening. "Your family, Rachel. We've always been here for you, and we always will be. Family helps each other, no matter what." And just like that, everything shifted. We were no longer fighting this battle alone. The sacrifice of Matt's parents was the turning point we needed. Their act of love, of giving without asking for anything in return, filled the empty space where my family's indifference had once lived. They showed us what true family was: the kind of family I had always dreamed of. One that offered support, not because they had to, but because they loved us. Within days, the money was raised and Lily's surgery was scheduled. The relief was overwhelming. But more than that, I had a profound realization. Sometimes the family you choose is the one that can truly save you. And in that moment, I knew that we had found our real family. Carol and Henry weren't bound to us by blood, but their love and sacrifice were far more meaningful than anything I had ever received from my own parents. I'll never forget that moment, the moment that taught me that love doesn't always come from the people you expect. Sometimes it comes from those who choose to walk beside you, no matter the cost. And I knew, with certainty, that Lily would grow up understanding that the true meaning of family isn't about shared blood. It's about shared love and sacrifice. As Lily's surgery was completed successfully and we saw her awake, healthy, and full of life again, something deep within me shifted. I realized that for so long, I had been running my life as if it were a race, constantly striving for recognition, for approval from those who, in the end, couldn't care less. For years, I had dedicated myself to trying to prove my worth to my family, hoping that one day they would see me for who I truly was, the hardworking, independent woman capable of achieving great things. Yet, no matter what I did, I was always met with indifference, and that hurt more than I was willing to admit. But now, standing in that hospital room with Lily by my side, I understood something far more profound. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I had spent so much of my life chasing validation, desperately hoping that the people I loved would appreciate my efforts. I had gone through countless sleepless nights, worked long hours, and poured my heart and soul into every project, only to be met with silence or dismissiveness. The moments that should have been celebrated felt empty, and the achievements I was proud of were dismissed as if they meant nothing. But when I looked at my daughter, when I saw the love and warmth in Matt's eyes, I realized that my true success wasn't dependent on anyone's approval. It was about finding peace within myself and embracing the love of those who truly mattered. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my design business, but this time, I did it on my own terms. I no longer sought approval or validation from people who never showed up when I needed them. Instead, I focused on the work, the passion, and the clients who appreciated the value I brought to the table. It wasn't easy. Rebuilding from the ground up takes time, effort, and a level of commitment that doesn't come without setbacks. But I was determined to succeed not for anyone else, but for myself, and for the family I had fought so hard to protect. I expanded my business, securing major contracts that elevated me in the industry. I signed deals that were far beyond what I had ever imagined, designing spaces that were more than just places to live. They were environments where people could feel truly connected. I built partnerships with top contractors, architects, and interior designers who respected my work and my vision. In a few short years, my name became synonymous with excellence in design. I had gone from being the overlooked daughter, the one who worked in silence, to an industry leader, a force to be reckoned with in the design world. But the true victory came not from the contracts or the accolades, but from the realization that I had finally stopped seeking approval from the people who had never given it to me. For years, I had bent over backwards, trying to live up to their expectations, and I had allowed their indifference to define my sense of self-worth. But now I understood that my value didn't come from their recognition, it came from within. I didn't need to constantly prove myself. The strength, the resilience, and the success I had achieved were all built on my own determination and my love for my family, and that's when I truly found freedom. I didn't need to look over my shoulder to see if my parents were watching or if they were proud of me. I didn't need to wait for a nod of approval from Dylan or anyone else. I had already proved to myself that I was capable, that I had everything I needed to succeed not just in business, but in life. The pressure to be someone else's idea of success faded, and I was finally able to focus on what truly mattered: my family, my peace, and my own growth. Looking back, I realize that the moment I stopped seeking approval was the moment I truly began to live. It was a new beginning not just for my business, but for me as a person. I had shed the need for validation and embraced the power of self-acceptance. And in doing so, I became stronger than I ever thought possible. This success, this peace, was mine not because I had proven anything to anyone, but because I had finally chosen to prove it to myself. A year had passed since the darkest moment of my life, the day I stood in front of my parents, hoping for their help to save my daughter. That moment, that crushing rejection, felt like it happened just yesterday. But somehow, through all the pain, something remarkable had happened. I had found strength in places I never expected, and I had found people who showed me what true love and family really meant. A year later, my story aired on a well-known talk show, Voices of Resilience. It was a moment I had never truly imagined, but there I was, sitting on the stage with a camera crew in front of me and an audience listening intently. The host, a seasoned woman with a sharp wit and a deep respect for the people she interviewed, looked at me with a kind but direct gaze. Her question was simple, but it cut to the core of everything I had experienced. If you could say one thing to the people who abandoned you, what would it be? I could feel the weight of the question settle in the pit of my stomach, but I didn't falter. The moment felt surreal, like everything that had happened had led to this single moment in time. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes briefly, and then I smiled. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of understanding, because I had learned something powerful over the past year, something that had taken me a long time to accept. I looked directly at the camera, knowing that this message would not only be heard by those who had turned their backs on me, but by anyone who had ever been through the kind of heartache I had endured. And then, in a calm but unwavering voice, I said, "Thank you. Because of you, I found my true family, the ones who helped me when I had nothing. And I learned that the real power comes from choosing yourself." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the studio was silent. It wasn't a cry for vengeance or an attempt to make my parents feel guilty, it was the truth. The truth that I had spent so many years trying to avoid. For so long, I had tried to make myself into someone they would love, someone they would accept. But I learned the hard way that no matter how much I gave, it was never going to be enough for them. The real breakthrough came when I realized that I didn't need their approval to be worthy of love and success. In fact, the moment I stopped trying to earn their love was the moment I started to heal. I had spent my whole life chasing recognition from people who didn't understand me, people who didn't value me for who I was. It took my daughter's illness and their refusal to help to finally show me the truth. True love, true family, isn't about obligation. It's about people who choose to stand by you when it matters most, not when it's convenient or when it fits their image. In the audience, I could see the tears in some eyes, the understanding in others. I knew that my story was more than just about me. It was about all the people who had ever felt abandoned, neglected, or overlooked by the ones they loved. It was about showing them that even in their darkest hour, they didn't have to be alone. As the interview continued, the host asked me how I had managed to turn my life around after everything that had happened. I smiled again, but this time, there was a sense of peace in my heart. I had worked hard, rebuilt my business, and surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me. But the most important thing I had done was learn to value myself, to choose myself over the toxic relationships that had held me back for so long. When the interview ended and the cameras turned off, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had shared my truth, not for sympathy, but for empowerment. I knew that no matter what happened after that moment, I had finally found the peace I had been searching for. And more importantly, I had found my true family, the people who had been with me every step of the way, who had never judged, never criticized, but had simply loved me for who I was. That day, I understood something that would change the rest of my life: the power to move forward, to heal, and to succeed comes not from the approval of others, but from the strength to choose yourself and to love yourself unconditionally. The media storm that followed my interview was unlike anything I had ever imagined. The truth, once out in the open, had a ripple effect far beyond what I could have anticipated. The world now knew about the years of neglect, the silent suffering I endured, and the refusal of my family to support me when I needed them most. As the articles spread, people began to connect the dots. The once untouchable Monroe family, whose reputation was built on appearances and the illusion of success, was now facing public scrutiny. My parents' business, which had been a cornerstone of their image for so long, began to crumble. Customers, once loyal to the Monroe brand, started to pull away. The reviews on the business's website dropped from 5 stars to 1-star rants, as people shared their disgust not just at the family's business practices, but also at the way they had turned their backs on their own flesh and blood. Suppliers began to cut ties, and the once thriving furniture store was soon forced to temporarily close due to mounting financial and legal pressures. But while the storm raged on, I felt a strange sense of peace that I had never experienced before. As I watched the fallout unfold from a distance, I realized that I didn't feel joy or satisfaction from their downfall. There was no sense of victory in their struggles. Instead, I felt a deep, unshakable peace that came from knowing I had made the right choice. I had walked away from the toxic, suffocating bond that had held me back for so many years. I had chosen myself, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the chains of resentment and pain. For years, I had tried to prove myself worthy of their love and approval. I had chased after recognition, trying to earn what I had never been given. But now I understood that no amount of effort, no achievement, no success would ever be enough for them. They had made it clear that their love was conditional, based not on who I was, but on what I could do for them. Once I stopped seeking that approval, once I stopped bending over backward to fit into a mold that wasn't mine, I realized just how much weight I had been carrying. The truth was, I had been holding on to a family that was only interested in what I could give them, not in who I was as a person. Chris, my younger brother, who had always been the golden child, was now facing the consequences of his actions. The carefully curated image of him, the charming, well-spoken son who could do no wrong, was slowly unraveling. As the business crumbled, the people who once looked up to him for guidance now began to turn their backs. His engagement to Natalie, once seen as the perfect match, also began to falter. She left him, not because of anything I did, but because she couldn't ignore the truth about the family he came from. The lies had caught up with him, just as they had with everyone else. But I didn't feel happy about Chris's struggles. I didn't feel any sense of satisfaction in watching him fall from grace. Instead, I felt empathy, knowing that he too was a product of the same system of superficiality and manipulation that had shaped me. I didn't want to see him suffer, but I also knew that it was no longer my responsibility to carry the burden of his choices. The peace I felt came not from watching others suffer, but from the realization that I was finally free. Free from the constant striving for approval, free from the need to prove myself to people who would never truly appreciate me. I had learned that letting go was the only way to move forward. Holding on to the past, holding on to the hope that things would somehow change, would only keep me stuck in a cycle of pain and disappointment. I had found a new path, one that was my own. I had built my own life, my own family, and my own business. I had surrounded myself with people who valued me not for what I could give them, but for who I was. Matt, my husband, had stood by me through thick and thin, supporting me in ways my parents never had. And Ava, my daughter, was the center of my world. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in my own worth, and to surround myself with love that was unconditional and genuine. Moving forward wasn't easy. Letting go of the past was a difficult and painful process, but as I stood in the new life I had created, I knew I had made the right choice. I no longer sought approval from anyone. I had learned that true happiness comes from within, and that family is not just about blood, it's about the people who choose to stand by you, to lift you up, and to love you for who you truly are. And with that peace in my heart, I knew that I was finally free. Free to live my life on my own terms. Free to love and be loved in return. And free to build a future where my happiness was not dependent on anyone else's approval. In life, we often find ourselves seeking approval and recognition from those around us, especially from our family. But one of the most powerful lessons we can learn is that true peace and fulfillment come from within, not from others' validation. It's important to understand that family is not defined by blood alone, but by those who stand by us through the toughest times, offering unconditional love and support. For many, this lesson comes later in life, but it's never too late to embrace the truth that our worth is not determined by how others perceive us. Letting go of toxic relationships and choosing to surround ourselves with those who respect and value us for who we truly are can bring profound peace. As we age, we must remember that it's okay to let go of past hurts, to forgive ourselves for not seeking approval, and to live life authentically. Building a family of choice, filled with those who uplift us, is far more rewarding than chasing the approval of those who never understood our true worth. The key to a peaceful heart and fulfilling life is not in pleasing others but in honoring our own journey and embracing those who truly care for us. Thank you for watching this Reddit family drama story. If you found this video moving, please show your support by liking it and subscribing to Silent Wars. Your support helps us create more stories that resonate with all of us. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a new video. See you in the next story.